So I just went back to look at what episode am I on. Anyway, what's up? It is Kohenet here. Welcome to the House of Liberation podcast. Not sure what this episode is. It might be episode 29. So if you don't know, we are all about unbinding the GoddIncense, from the inside out. And I am over here. So when I'm feeling a bit funky in this particular dimension, I will watch a discovery of witches. So here's the thing. I'm one of those cheesy people, neurodivergent to the core, that I will watch something that I really like. My goodness, more times than I can count, because it brings me comfort. So I was sitting here watching a discovery of witches, which I did read the books. And of course, the books are much more descriptive. And of course, as with anything put on film or any fictional, quote unquote, fictional stories, it's going to be cheesy. I don't expect it to, be 100% legit, depending, because remember my last podcast, we talked a little bit about that. So I'm over here. So I earlier was talking on TikTok. I was like, oh man, I've been having such a rough day and had a total meltdown, the ugly cry thing, because I was like, man, these days have been really challenging. And I don't even know why I just said and. I meant A-N-D, but anyway. All right. So as I was making a meme, because I had shared, about my life going through another cleansing. Now, here's my thing about these things is that I acknowledge them. I look at them. They sometimes really kick my ass. And what is actually kicking my ass is the the in-between, right? From one state to another. And so I've been doing some timeline jumps. I make it sound like it's like, Skittles or something. But they're very intentional, very conscious in terms of when I'm doing them. And part of the experience that's going to happen, at least in my... in my world, and I'm going to tell you why. Because part of shifting the physical experience in this dimension so that it's different from my mother's and my father's experience and my ancestors' experience means that, translating into this physical experience, a rewiring, right? Like a readjusting. And so there are ways that, and this is what I was just talking about a little bit on Facebook, because if you're a warrior, priestess, priest, the cosmology does not matter. There are certain people that are built, created, that embody warriors in ways that cannot be fully conceptualized in this dimension, in the very the matrix, what we see as the programming. And one of the things I've been sitting with these past couple of weeks was the idea that we have all types of priestessing and ministering in the world. I'm going to use that M word. All kinds of work going on from different cosmologies, right, that are being tended to. But one piece that's really fascinating to me is that I don't come from this, my initiation and my training was I know how to say this. It was in the field, in life, in the process, in the moment. It wasn't those where I was I pull back and, have this regular, I don't know, daisy life, right? And then I come back and, I'm in it, I'm in la lucha, whatever we call it, right? I didn't have that. All of my initiation and all of my teachings, or most of them, and I want to give that like an 85 to 90%, have come as a direct result of lived experiences and having to show up. So what that means also is that when you've been in the community, when you've been in your family, in your people, and you are offering medicine in that context versus the one where they say, oh, nobody can really teach their own people. That's some whack ass shit that that to me is the beginning of the like fucking like family lineage fragmentation. Because before I can take anybody else's sage advice, I need to be able to hear the wisdom in my grandmothers. I need to be able to hear the wisdom in my mothers and my fathers and so on, right? Like, what the fuck is this thing that people are like, oh, you can't, if you can't be with your people, and I mean this in the ways that we still have to set boundaries if there's a lot of toxic behavior and patterning that's still, or like the person doesn't change their own relationship to it. So what happens is that the roles are continuously played out, right? Like you can't change in that relationship. And then, you have to do something different. You can't stay there. You can't nurse that. You can't coddle that. Although what I'm going to tell you is the reason I can say that shit is because I've done the opposite. I coddled it and nursed it. Really, so many lessons, so many learnings. Anyway, so I don't believe in that. Like you can't, this is the saying actually goes, there is not a prophet in his own land. And I don't agree. So anyway, but let's move on to more important things right now. So to me, when you're living the experience as a warrior that you are trained up, because you're actually trained up, and you have to look back at your family dynamics. You have to look back at a lot of pieces and find, the threads in there. For me, I grew up with my mother and her homegirls. My mommy have a lot of friends. She was one of those that was like, I don't have friends because, trust is a thing. So whoever was considered by my mother a friend, that heifer had to roll like she rolls. And so shout out to any of my mom's friends who are listening. You know who you are. You were the prayer warriors that I grew up with. You were the folks that were there contending. And even when the relationship changed, they were always praying. Sorry, I'm scooching around. They were always praying for us and letting us know. Until this day, I still, get the message from a friend that remains, that she's always praying. And so I grew up with it. I grew up with things like spending all night praying for a breakthrough and shit like that, and vigils. And what I've understood as I've gotten older is that, right, like we're the machete people. We don't do this like, nowadays I think about it because there's parts of me, that I'm like, I want the soft life, whatever they call that now, right? Which sounds so cheesy. And I mean it though, because I've been at war most of my life. And whether it's warring with energies around me, warring for my own life, warring for my family, my community, whatever it is, it's shown up in different ways. And with a clarity that I understand that this is how I serve my community. This is how I serve my people, where I may not, for me, I have to work and continue to practice speaking my own piece or speaking like what I want or what I need sometimes. But that's not a question when it comes to outside of myself. And what we've done, it's really fascinating because as I think about it, as I'm talking about it, I'm like, we've really villainized the fact that people could do for other people, right? Because we talk about how this is trauma, etc. Yes, I don't disagree in terms of if we're going to give it language in this dimension, in the same way that in this dimension, if you're neurodivergent or you have ADHD or any other mental health challenge, right, they have these diagnoses, these names for these things. That's this dimension. That's that the matrixy world, the programmed world, and shit like that. But if you shift that over into magical thinking and magical understanding, then you understand that what they're calling ADHD is a mad fucking weaver, right? What they're calling somebody who is bipolar is somebody who can navigate the day and the night. And if you don't understand magic, and if you don't understand this multidimensional existence, then of course we're going to lean into just the language used at a secular place to describe who we are. But I'm gonna put that on the shelf for right now. I think that that's a great conversation for later on. Right now, the one I want to have is, if you are a warrior type person, how do you know if you're a warrior type person that has had these experiences? Well, like I said to you, you didn't get trained up like in some room in some 3-week retreat type of joint. That's not what happened for you. You came up in this. You have somewhere in your story, you have ancestors or grandparents, parents, however you want to. You had somebody in your line whose ass, whatever your cosmology is, that was fucking like, in my family. If I go back as far as I can go back in terms of like my own memory, my great grandmother on my mom's side, she was known. Okay, we can even do my great grandmother, right? She was known as the town midwife, okay? The town healer. Go to the next. She was known, her and my great-grandfather were known as the prayer warriors. Like the family was known. They weren't like unknown in the community. They were known for their, this is Christian language, for their righteous behavior. They were known because they were people of prayer, because my great-grandmother, until her last little shuffle, she walked her ass to church, had a corner she sat on, which she usually had a pillow in her Bible. And this was known. And so there are signs of it all over. Now, if you jump a generation, like from my great-grandmother to my grandmother, now my grandmother chose to, along with a lot of her siblings, because they grew up in that strict Pentecostal shit, they kind of fled. When they fled the coop, they literally fled the coop, right? And started their own lives. And so then you come around to my mother's generation. Now, my mother had a relationship with the divine that was beautiful, sacred, personal, and unique, And so always very connected and very like, her intuition was on spot, very magical. And then you have me, right? My siblings and so on. And so it's somewhere in the past. You'll see evidence of it. If not in that way where you can trace it to your lineage, because let's be real, life is interesting that way. You know it by who you've been in the stories. So as far as I could go back, I was always really good at speaking out for injustice. I think of things like when I was in junior high, I fucking saw this guy he was getting beat up by a group of kids. And my friend and I had walked by, but I couldn't keep on walking. And so I turned around and I was pissed as shit. I don't know what I thought I was going to do. Is 3 big dudes and junior high. So the guy was like on the floor. He was getting hammered. And I looked at him and I cried. I felt so like I wanted to help him. I couldn't just stand there. And I was saying something. And the dudes were like, what are you talking about? Right? They were like coming at me. And the guy drew their attention back. And he just looked at me with a tear coming out of his eye. He was like, get out of here. Like I couldn't. It doesn't matter. And that's one among many stories. I could just go back, right? And it's one of those where the impulse is that of a warrior. The impulse is that of someone who understands battle and who doesn't, because you carry light inside of you, because you're carrying this divine gift or responsibility. Really, it's a responsibility for reals. Then you always feel the compulsion to, fight for justice. Now, here's the challenge with this, because you could spend so much time externally doing that you don't evaluate who's doing it for you, and simultaneously, how are you doing it for you? And so one of the things I was like, when I'm in this moment where I'm feeling deeply how something's affecting me or how it may hurt, and the meaning that I'm making out of it in this dimension and in this moment, that's not me flailing or lacking faith or lacking focus or lacking any of those things. It's me actually having an opportunity to feel fully the things that I've just taken. And now I'm not saying that any of this is really good, because here's my thing. I think that if you're the warrior type person, and we have our own practices, that's 100 right there. Every warrior has their own practice, their own spiritual hygiene, their own way of like nourishing and refreshing. The challenge is making sense between the dimensions internally and how things have impacted you and what you feel about them and what you think about them, versus how often you are out there, like, fighting the good fight, like they say. And so when I was writing this earlier out on Facebook, I was like, hold on, because I often find myself explaining this, because you would think, well, just be with me. Well, if you're a priestess of liberation, you're a priestess and you're a Jewish and you're bada 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 ba, and you believe in the dimensions and all of those things, and you believe in, yep. How is it that you still are having these hard times? And how is it that you're still having all these emotions? Shouldn't you be able to be like, oh, the goddess wills it, you know what I mean? That situation. Yes and no. And like I said, it's depending your life, it's depending your journey. But if you've been on 120 when everybody else has been on like an 80 and a 70, and you've been going and fighting battles in dimensions that people are not even fathoming, trust and believe that if we don't have enough support on this end, you will become exhausted. You can burn out. You can and that's a much more modern theme, right? Like this idea of burning out. But here's what's happening. The density of this dimension and its entrapments weigh heavy. So let me go further. Certain experiences, or how you grew up. If you grew up in poverty, you're differently abled, things like that. You grew up in the system of oppression. And while that was not your defining movement, it did impact you. It did cause it in this dimension, right? It does have an impact. And so what do we begin to do? How do we make sense out of this stuff? If, we're moving from place to place. And now it's definitely about the meaning we give things, right? So what does it mean if I can't fill in the blank, or if I feel fill in the blank? Here's my thing, that as a warrior, listen, Linda. I hope your name is not Linda. If it is, much love. But listen, Linda. The thing that I am communicating here is that it is time for us that have been on 120 for a really long time to take the moment that the divine is giving us to realign, re-nourish our bodies. If your food has fallen by the wayside, strange phrase, if your self-care exists or never existed, all of these things, all of these habits that have been shaped here, they need shifting. And I'm going to tell you why this is like a thing for me now. This is a thing for me because I watched, now my mother, and I talk about her, my mother, she was one of those people whose faith was fucking ridiculous. Which is, in my head, I'm like, that's why her ass is on the other side, whatever that means. You know what I mean, right? That's why. Because that woman's faith fucking didn't move mountains. It shifted geography. It was incredible, and yet her life was full of so much challenge, And some of that shit is just shit that she had, it's a story. Anyway, but here's the thing about that. is that my mother died of pancreatic cancer. All right. She was 60 years old. She had just turned 60 that year. I mean, I think I have a picture of her on Instagram, not on Facebook, because she was like in a tizzy about it. Don't put that up. You know, what are they going to think? The they she was worried about don't even fucking, they're not even on any of my Facebook pages. So, but she's talking about the old guard, the old school folks from church days and shit. But here's my thing. My mother went and she smoked a cigar with me. We had a shot because she was in remission. She died that same year. Why did my mother get pancreatic cancer? And this is what, like, for my mother and my father, who also died of cancer. Here's my thing that was one of the most painful lessons in the universe. One of the painful lessons is that I had to watch them be angry, confused, heartbroken. Just the level of confusion on their faces was, I don't have words, because they didn't understand. If they believed and put their trust in the divine, why were they sick and why were they dying of sickness? And one of the things you need to know about me is that I don't touch that shit with a 10-foot pole. And what I'm meaning by that is that I have no desire in no cosmology, nor in this world, nor in the one to come, nor in any other one, to start saying that people are sick because they don't have enough faith. I'm not about that life. I have no desire to speak in that way or even think that way, especially having watched two people that I love grapple with God in the end, you know? But what I did learn by this, and what I have really like let nest in my belly, is that they did not have the care that they needed. And they did not choose for themselves the care that their bodies needed. They took for granted this mortal shell that we live in the same ways that I've taken it for granted. Hell, earlier I had a couple of M&Ms. That shit is fucking toxic as shit. Anywho, right? and one of my vices is like soda. Usually Pepsi or Coke. I'm more of a Pepsi person. Because the bubbles in the soda is a stim for me. And then there's pieces, of having an addiction, etc., to the caffeine, whatever. All right. But you know what I mean? So there's similar ways, patterns, and habits that I have been operating out of. And part of watching like this whole scene go down with both of my parents, almost in the same way, one a little bit better than the other because my dad died in his house, surrounded by the people that he loved and that loved him, etc. My mom, she was surrounded by people who loved her and she loved. The only thing is that she died in the hospital, and that wasn't, I don't think she would have want to go that way. Anyway, but moving on, right? But the piece here about this is that that watching this happen also happened as a result of the neglect of this physical form. And I know that folks be about the weight shit. You can't don't come at me with that shit, because we're not talking about that. You could be thin as a rail. You could be shapely as an old Coca-Cola bottle. It doesn't matter. Your body, if we're not able to care for it, we are already environmentally compromised by this dimension that we live in and the shit that's going on, right? The food we eat, the water we drink, blah, blah, blah. So the best that we can do is to actually do the best we can do in this dimension. But in order to do that, we have to be able to get to the root of the emotional ways in which these things are holding on in our psyche, our conscious, our subconscious experiences, stories of trauma, abandonment, neglect, fill in the blank, mistreatment. Now we can start with that story in your childhood, or we could start with that story as an adult. It doesn't matter. But what does is how long you've been in this physical form. I mean, time is an illusion. Having said that, when your ass starts hitting the stage where shit starts changing. So what it's like, what are we talking about? But anyway, I digress. once things start changing, the capacity of your body to actually be nourished well enough, and not just nourished in terms of the food that you eat, but the environmental aspects. As a woman of color, both financially, environmentally, right, there have been challenges and struggles that, because I didn't prioritize, money, the access to money, or even like thinking, let me rephrase that, because I think it's just, that's not my main drive. And I also, there's a lot of situations in my life in the past that were funky anyway, right? Each season you learn new things and you got to move on. But what doesn't seem to change and seems to be a huge common denominator is, and this is why to me trauma has become a big subject, not to stay there. And it's always, to me, I'm like, what is it with these people where they're like, oh, people use it as excuses? Yes. Some motherfuckers don't know how to get their shit together and are just looking for another way. They hurt people who continuously like to feel good by having an excuse for why they can't show the effort or fill in the blank. Yes, there are those people, but I'm not talking about those people ever. I'm not ever talking about the people who misuse, the people who abuse or excuse. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about real people whose lives are desirous of healing, but also have these things subconsciously and consciously that are in operation, like a bad habit over and over on a replay that's so sick you can't even imagine, right? And sick as in like dope, right? Like it's like, oh, it's like a song on replay that every time will change, like we'll have another remix and another remix, but it's still the same song. It's just remixed a million times. Because the belief that informs the thought, that informs the action, that informs the practice, the habit, is the shit you got to shift. Now, having said that, we got a lot of good books and we got a lot of awesome people on some shit, revealing secrets that are not secrets of the universe, but definitely hidden in plain sight, because you have to respect it. You can't misuse things. You have to respect the reciprocity of the universe, of the divine, of the cosmos, to give us information. Lots of medicine around, but the reason why we don't see it as plainly is because we have no respect for it. We've bought into the colonial, white supremacists, ableists, all of that shit, the ideas of what it means to conquer and take on, a host, to be a host of something else. And so what tends to happen is that our minds are so dominated by the subjugation of these ideas, right? And ideas that keep us stuck. So we're stuck in a frame. We keep on doing the same thing over, thinking the same things, et cetera, et cetera. Unless you redo that, unless you undo that, unless you have the practice that your frequency is actually re-nourished, not just by like, oh, I've, changed the way I think. Well, I also got to change the way I move. And I also change the way I perceive things. Like, it's layered. I change the way I eat. I change the way I wake up in the morning. I change the way I go to bed at night, right? Like, things, if you're going to fully embody, then you're going to have to get to the root. The root is not like this fucking like, a dandelion where it's like you're cutting and then shit grows back. But it's more like, how do you uproot entirely so that what you replace it with is actually generative and continues to call into your frequency. Now, this whole shit, I wasn't thinking about any of this earlier because I was just like, I'm tired of that old shit. Like, you can't be having a hard moment if you an enlightened motherfucker. And then, so there's, half of the camp is like everybody suffers. And the other half of the camp is like suffering is an illusion. And I'm like, all right, how about we say this? How about, depending where you are, where you come from, what your lived experience has been here, what you've had, what you've believed, what you haven't believed, all those things playing on whatever you define those experiences to be. Is it suffering to have my parents die? And I'm sure wherever they're at, whatever they're doing, they're happier than when they were fucking here, because this shit, was a little bananas and they couldn't get past certain things because they didn't have the same information or the tools, right? Like, I spent the last year and a half with my mother, her last living year and a half, processing through childhood trauma. And what I'm saying to you is I knew my mama got to go, and I didn't want my mama to go with all of that pain still, defining her. Yeah. And so I was like, Aquí se this is now good. This is not good, right? Like I knew that some of that shit needed to come out. And I've shared this story before. Something as simple as she'd be like, I'm so stupid, or I'm not stupid. I'm not stupid. She would say it all the time. I've said this before, and I'm like, okay, lady, what in the baby fuck? Okay, who told you were stupid? Where does this come from? And then she tells me the story. She tells me the story, but the story wasn't about who called her stupid. The story was about an experience that she had when she was young. She got hit by a car, had a concussion. It was like 5th grade, 6th grade. Her brain wasn't the same. I'm sure her brain wasn't the same before. It wasn't. Before that, it wasn't like something regular anyway. The heifer was too neurodivergent, too magical for her own good, right? But why? Because I understood, as somebody who navigates between the worlds, I understood that even as powerful as this woman was, listen, you can't be asking my mom to pray over shit. I mean, now she on the incense altar all the time, sending up them blessings to me. Ooh, lady, I need them right now. You know what I'm saying? That's how I'm feeling about that. But not a problem. But some of this unprocessed shit, unconsciously unprocessed, because she was, again, she could like bypass some of those things that she didn't know how to address or touch or engage in safely, man. And so what happened with that is that, right, like she had to keep on pushing. Now in this dimension, she pushed like a motherfucker, right? In this dimension, she, moved up in her jobs. She, fucking went back to school for nursing in her 50s, got her her registered nurse, whatever. Right? Like or maybe, is it an LPN or anyway, I always forget. She pushed until the last moment. And when I tell you the last moment, I'm telling you that I still remember the day my mother called me on the phone and said, AIM, she was bawling. She was crying. And I was like, Mom, what's up? Are you okay? What's going on? She said, can you come get me? I am disoriented and I don't know. I can't figure out where I'm going. I was like, of course, where are you right now? And she described the surrounding. I went with my car, picked her up. We left the other car there. I said, don't worry, we'll come and get this car later, etc. Fucking brought her back to the house. She bawled because that was the last time she was going to be able to work as a nurse. All this work, right? Like I remember. And so having said that, this is, I feel like this could be like a several layered type, a several layered podcast. Like, what is this alpha talking about? What I'm trying to tell you is that if you've been in warrior mode for a long time, boo, it's time for us to give ourselves a chance to process some shit. And processing is a layered thing. It's not like, oh, I did 6 years of therapy. I'm great. I know how to breathe to self-regulate. I'm happy for you. But because your ass is magical and you got shit to do in the realms, you have to understand there's some other shit we got to clear out. And there's some things that we got to get feeling, because there's some places of disconnect. That doesn't make you less spiritual. That actually makes you a human fucking being that's magical as fuck and has all these fucking like layers of life. Like you have all these layers, past ones, middle ones, future ones, all the layers of life. And so there's some things, if we are not well in our bodies, in our subconscious or in our conscience, we're not going to be well in our bodies because our bodies have been holding. And I'm a curvy woman and I like my curvy body. You know what I'm saying? I'm all right with it. I understand that it's been protecting me. And I also understand that I need to support it differently. And that I need to respect it a little bit better, because dimensionally, I've already done that. I've been the wounded warrior, right? I lived into that. So did my mama and my grandmother and so on and so forth. And so we've been that already. Now it's time to be the fucking, vibrant warrior, the thriving warrior, the embodied enjoy warrior, the I will pull out my sword and I will also sing you a lullaby warrior, right? Like, to really hold vibrationally the transformation that our generations have been waiting for, the suffering that we've experienced in this dimension generationally as people of color, fill in the blank, with ableism, all of it, all the language that we use in this dimension. We've been through a lot. And now the time to rise has come. But you cannot do that in the way that you've done war. This is that time where you really have to begin to pull in your hygiene as a warrior. You have to, and all of this shit is like the tough shit sometimes, because you have to realize that the life that nourishes the warrior who is meant to do, huge ass battle is a different type of life. It's accessible, but we have to surrender to the idea that this is what it's going to take for us to be well, to do what we're here to do. And that doesn't mean to put down your sword. It's really interesting, all this the cross of language that has a lot to do with the cross of ideologies and theologies and philosophies around the spirit, around spiritual, embodiment and cosmology. And my thing is this. Here's what I'd like to see. What I'd like to see is people stop reclaiming the real deal Holyfield type of thing about their spirituality and be like, you know what? For example, I am a Jewish priestess. And my cosmology is an earth-based Judaism. Like that's how we do ritual. That's how, we do everything. We do life in that way. It doesn't make it the original thing. It makes it the thing of my people. It makes it the thing of, and the people that are best. This is what I love about movies like Avatar, Divergent. I'm trying to think of other ones. You have Harry Potter, all these things that come out of left, right, middle, above, below fields. They are really giving us an enormous amount of medicine. My goodness, it's being like the dimensions cannot help themselves. They're like, we got to help these people because they won't fucking talk to us. And so now we have to do it through the movies. We got to use these people, right, to write these books that don't even believe in it. Like, I was blown away that the author of Harry Potter, which I can't bring to my memory right now, she doesn't believe in magic. Heifer's writing some fucking what? Mind you, I didn't like the movies. I thought they were horrible. But anyway, right? That's the language of magic. That's the language of, priestessing. That's the language of fill in the blank. It's the language of the dimensions. And so because it's the language of the dimensions, you're like, wait, just to get through to us that it is not going to be when we oppress each other with I know the real formula. This is what real. Shut the fuck up. Stay your lane. Take care of your business. You got plenty to take care of in your lane. And if you're going to come work with me and you're coming from a different cosmology, let me know so we can figure out where's the middle point versus all this real deal Holyfield shit that doesn't do anything for us. And this, again, it's like distracted noise rather than the focus of what are these cosmologies asking of us? They're asking us to connect to the spirit inside. They're asking us to connect to the earth, and that our bodies mimic the earth, and that our spirits mimic come on. So, all of that to say that it is important to process your experience in this dimension, to rewrite what it means after you've honored how it has felt here, because you've been living in you're like a trilingual, quadrilingual human. You're speaking all these languages. You're code switching between so many dimensions, timelines, and identities. For the love of all that's holy, you must care for yourself now, by giving yourself permission to have the experience and process it through. and shift what it means and create the space for faith to bloom and blossom as it will. I love you, and I hope you've enjoyed this, and I will soon talk to you again. Adios.